Several years ago I saw a television documentary on children who seem to remember past lives, and I was utterly fascinated. These children who seemed to recognise places that they'd never been to remember people that they'd never seen. And I think that really planted the seed of the story for me. What particularly appealed to me in the story idea was this notion of the supernatural seeping into an ordinary life. So Grace, my protagonist, lives in a very familiar world of nursery school and play dates and chicken nuggets, but gradually becomes aware that something very strange is happening with her child. And I loved that idea of writing about the collision between the ordinary and the uncanny. There's actually quite a lot written about children who seem to remember past lives. There's an American psychiatrist, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has collected over 2,000 case histories and attempted to validate them. So certainly I looked at the research literature. But I think when you're writing a book, often the very best material comes just from talking to people about what you're doing. When I was writing the book, I met someone who told me how when his little boy was just 3, he used to wake in the night sobbing and saying he wanted to go home. And he and his wife would try and reassure him and say, "You are home, this is your home." And the little boy would just go on crying and saying, "No, I want to go home." And that was a real gift for the story, and I used that in creating Sylvie. But I think I've never really been the kind of person who feels that reality is just what's in front of us, just what's seen, and that we can easily understand everything. I think I've always felt that our existence is very mysterious and that we understand so little. I wrote a lot and secretly as a child. It was entirely fantasy. I was addicted to Tolkien. And then when I was about 12, playing the piano became more important, music became more important in my life, and I actually did a music degree and started writing again in my mid-20s, and I've never stopped since. Certainly the other things that I've done have fed into my writing. I worked as a psychiatric social worker, and I've always been very fascinated by psychology, looking at how relationships work, how our backstories shape the people we are today, what has made us who we are. Childhood memories and fears undoubtedly do inform my writing, but I think in a way Sylvie was written more from a mother's perspective. She was actually very easy to write. She was always there in my head. I knew just what she would look like, how she would talk. And sometimes she's just a very normal, forthright little girl. And at other times she's in the grip of the thing that haunts her. And it's at those moments that she turns away from her mother in a way that hurts Grace terribly. I've actually brought up 2 daughters myself, and I think sometimes there can be a rather otherworldly quality about small children, almost something spooky, and I wanted to capture that. Being a mother has shaped my writing tremendously, and not always in obvious ways. My younger daughter has been ill for the past 11 years, and looking back at the book after I'd written it, I can see how much I used that experience in writing Grace. Grace struggles and struggles, but nothing she tries works, and that's certainly an experience I've had. And she's also hypervigilant. She's very sensitive to every nuance of Sylvie's mood, and I think that would be true of me and probably any mother who's had an ill or troubled child. And I think her loneliness too, the way she feels that nobody really knows what it's like for her, that's something I could identify with. But I think I only really realised how much I'd used that story when I'd finished writing the book, that it was a fairly unconscious process. I always knew that Grace would have a journey in the book that would take her out of her known world, and I settled on the west coast of Ireland very early on, really because I'd seen this rather dreamy look in people's faces when they talked about it. And we only actually went there once I'd written a draft of the book, which is often a great way to do research because you know what questions you want answering. And it was a very magical experience. It's such a bleak, beautiful landscape there. And there was something quite enchanting about arriving at this little fishing village that I'd chosen as the model for Cold Harbour and stepping out of the car into this world that I'd imagined.